Hello, friend. You're welcome to this very important discussion on the advantages and disadvantages of primary data collection, and of course, the ethical consideration in the course of collecting primary data. We will be looking at basically what it takes to get the best of your primary data, and to start with, it's important you know that whether you are using quantitative or qualitative research, if you know the type of data you are going to use, it has a lot to do with your approach or your method of collecting that data. Most qualitative data are collected using primary data approach. Quantitative also can be collected using primary data approach. And then it's important to note that obtaining your primary data gives great insights in the particular research you are doing, and it can be used across different disciplines. It can be used in the health sciences, it can be used in educational studies, it can be used in economics, it can be used in marketing, it can be used in different sectors, different research. Even in biological sciences, you can also use primary data depending on what you are trying to do. All right, so we will be looking at the advantages of primary data. Basically, it's a lot of benefits, associated, a lot of benefits associated with primary data. The key one is the fact that it gives you the opportunity to improve or ensure the quality of the data you are using, and of course the applicability of your research output, because you are collecting it basically on what research you are trying to do. It offers that precision, it offers current data, and then is directly related to the question you are trying to solve. Here we'll be looking at basically four major benefits. There are so many of them, but four of them we'll be considering here. The first one is the fact that it's very specific. Primary, that's the major advantage of primary data. You're able to identify the research question or research objective you are trying to achieve, and you tailor your instrument towards ensuring that you collect the specific variable or the specific data or specific information you need to achieve that objective. So it gives you this first-hand information that is tailored down to your question or to your hypothesis. That's a major advantage. It's very specific. The second one is the fact that you are in control of your data. You are in control of the quality. You see that piece there? This particular piece is for game. Young people who know how to play game will appreciate it more. It makes you in charge of the game. You can win or lose in the game depending on how you handle it. So in the primary data collection, you are largely in charge as a researcher of the quality of the work, and to ensure the quality, you make sure you do the needful thing in terms of procedure you are going to use, in terms of your sample size and how you select the sample size, in terms of quality control, controlling the procedure in a way that ensures that errors are minimized. You are able to address potential biases that may be associated with that data, and even your method of data collection can be adjusted. There was this study we did, it's cross-country study. We studied 4 different countries on maize adoption of improved maize varieties. We studied Nigeria, we studied Ghana, we studied Zambia, we studied Mali. And so we're able to make sure that in each country we adjust the instruments in a way that ensures that we have similar indices. So when we pull our data, we can look at holistically what happens across the 4 countries, while we also consider peculiarity in individual countries. By the time we want to use the same instruments in Mali and in Zambia, we had to translate in French, and to do that we make sure that we didn't lose the quality, we didn't lose the indices, we didn't lose the essence of each of the questions, so that we're able to get data set that we can pull together. So that is part of it. It gives you this flexibility that you can adjust your instruments to fit what you want to do. All right, another major advantage is that your data is current. By the time you are using cross-country, time series data that have been collected by someone else or secondary data generally, you discover that that information, you may not have the current situation. For instance, you are looking at price variation. And then if it's in country where there is this volatility in price change so quickly, and then you are using that information to do your analysis today, you may be getting a wrong conclusion. So it gives you up-to-date information that you will use for your analysis. All right. And then the fourth one is that it gives you exclusive insight into a particular thing you are trying to look at. For instance, you are trying to look at the study I mentioned earlier, adoption of maize variety. And then you're able to narrow down your research to identifying the local names used in each of the countries to refer to the same variety. It gives you exclusive insight. You're able to identify what they call sample, plots. The measurement of land, whether it's in plot or hectare or whichever method they are using, you're able to harmonize this so that each measurement is the same across board. So it gives you insight into specific thing you are studying, of which secondary data someone else had collected it. You are not sure whether what they call, for instance, GDP, what they call, for instance, unemployment, is measured the same way across different countries. But if you are the one collecting data of unemployment in 4 countries, and you launch nationwide survey using the basic sampling method, you can be sure that relatively your instruments, your measurements are the same. But the measurement of Nigeria in unemployment may not be the same with Ghana, may not be the same with Mali, may not be the same with Zambia or South Africa. And yet somebody is using that as a secondary data to do analysis. So you lose quality in your data, and that will alone will affect the conclusion of that research. All right, so it also helps the researcher to dive into new areas, because the data is not available, but because it's primary, you go to collect it, and it may lead to novel theories, new ideas, new area. While we talk about disadvantages, there are definitely some disadvantages associated with primary data collection. Your job as a researcher is to make sure that these disadvantages do not work against your outputs, your work. If you keep your eye on them and you do the needful, the disadvantages will not diminish, reduce the quality of your data. So these disadvantages are associated with it, and if you don't handle them very well, it can affect the viability, the dependability, and the final results of your work. Like the advantage, we'll look at basically 4 of them here, 4 disadvantages. And the first one is that, like your picture you see here, if you want to use primary data, you may as well need to carry a lot of funds on wheelbarrow. The cost can be high. It can be very expensive to do that. All right, so that's a major challenge. It has financial implication. And this thing happened in the procedure, in the steps taken for primary data collection. One, somebody is going to design it, the instrument you will use. You may need to do what we call household listing if it's not been done before. Like when I conducted a research in about 5 states in Nigeria, we studied Kwara State, we studied Oyo State, we studied Nasarawa, we studied Katsina, we studied Kaduna State. We were looking at maize-based products, and we selected the communities based on our selection method. And these communities, we needed to find those who were producing maize-based products. So the first instance, we had to visit the community through key informants, through anchor persons. We visited the community to introduce the research we wanted to do, and in the course of that, we did what we call household listing. We listed the households, the farmers who were involved in this business. Based on that listing, we were able to draw a reliable sample, and that was what we used across board. So imagine getting to visit the states just to introduce your study and then do household listing. Come back, someone is designing the instrument, you go and do some pilot study, and then you come back, you test your pilot study, you be sure that is okay, and then you train personnel who will do this collection. I had to visit the 5 states, just to make sure the quality, we got the best from that work. I went with the team. I went with a team to cover Southwest, and then getting to the North, I had to pick people who speak Hausa. In the West, we had to pick people who speak the language there. That is part of the advantage. So, and it has a lot of cost implication. Engaging these people, and then this study is done. The data is collected, the data is cleaned, the data is prepared for analysis. So it has a lot of cost implication, but it shouldn't scare you. Your eye should be on being able to reduce this cost as much as possible, so that the cost of your data doesn't become higher than the expected output. It also is time consuming. Like the process I've mentioned now, it took quite some time to complete that process. It is time consuming. Look at this clock here. It is wasting, so to say. So it can take a lot of time, but it's important you spend your time and get the quality data you require, than you hurry over the process and then get something that is not reliable. And these policies are built based on your output that is not reliable. Sometimes the result can be so devastating. All right, so you need to be sure, take your time, try to make sure you manage your time, reduce time wasting process as much as possible, but just know that it takes time. That's one of the disadvantages in using primary data collection. And the third one is that you are limited in your scope. Like the instrument you are seeing here, you see the circular part here. It shows you where the person can see using this particular instrument, and that's what happens in primary data. It reduces the scope of your research. Like I mentioned, we had to study 5 states, and then it reduced our scope. We didn't look at what was happening in the eastern part of the country. All right, so it limits your scope and it affects your ability to generalize in that study. So our finding, it became difficult to say this is the situation in Nigeria, but you can relatively talk about the 2 other regions we studied. So it restricts you, and then sometimes even the variable you are collecting, because you are trying to manage time too, you may want to reduce the number of information you are collecting at a particular time, in as much as it helps you to study the in-depth of a particular thing. It doesn't provide for something that can quickly be generalized. And then the other one is the fact that you need to keep your eye. This is not, we have finished the 4 disadvantages. The 4 of them is: number 1, the issue of cost; number 2, the fact that is time consuming; number 3, the fact that it limits your scope; and then number 4, the fact that there could be bias. All right, so this 4th one is to ensure you keep your eyes on things that can draw bias into this study. The accuracy and dependability of your primary data can be destroyed, can be jeopardized, can be damaged during the process of collection if the bias issue are not handled well. For instance, your sampling can be skewed in a way that biases that result. Your sampling, the responses, if the right questions are not asked, it can introduce bias. If the persons who are responding to you are not in the right mind or willing to respond, it can introduce bias. There could be bias from the researcher, there could be bias from the respondent, there could be bias in the selection. So if you keep your eye on all of these and make sure these bias areas are well managed, it will reduce the chances of bias and error in your data. All right, now we want to look at the ethical issues around primary data collection. It's important in all your primary data collection that you keep your eye on ethical issues. You need to guarantee the participant's integrity. You need to respect it and uphold it throughout the research. You need to maintain integrity of the research process. All right, so the research must uphold the necessary moral principles that will ensure credibility, responsibility, and quality of your data. And what are those issues that should concern you? First, the respondents must give you informed consent. Informed consent means you must explain the objective, you must explain the selection process, you must explain what the data will be used for, and then ensure that the respondent is assured that you will not use information that are not necessary, and even your sharing plan of the data should be explained so that the person said yes, go ahead. And then this respondent should also be informed that in the course of this research, any question he or she is not comfortable with can be skipped and said, I don't want to answer that. Or is also free to stop the interview at any point and say, I am not continuing again, I'm not comfortable with your research. These are things that should be built into this informed consent. It's the cornerstone of ethical research. Informed consent. It is important to explain, to the person. Sometimes we get to places we want to interview, and this person is not understanding Igbo or Pidgin English very well. You look for someone who can interpret in the local dialect, what exactly you are explaining, so that before the person will sign or even thumbprint in some locations where we have done our research. All right. So it should be clearly explained to the participant what you plan to do with the data and what exactly the respondent is expected to do. Another ethical issue is to make sure you minimize harm as much as possible. Research activities should be kept safe during the design, during the execution of the study, and even during the report. Yes, during the report. You can finish an interview and somebody has not permitted you to use his name. Of course, you are supposed to make sure you don't include people's personal details in your report. And you mistakenly include it because you want to impress whosoever. And then that information is released. The person can make the person lose his job, or lose business opportunity, or even face death threats. All right, so you must ensure that you minimize harm as much as possible. This harm could be social, it could be psychological, it could be emotional, it could be physical. You make sure that your research doesn't expose your respondent to such harm. Even you collecting the data, you make sure you are safe enough to collect what you want to collect. We've gone to a community somewhere, to do a study, and what we were doing, we had done a baseline study, and then after some time we came back about 3 years to check the follow up on that data, and we were interviewing the same households. There were actually about 1,000 households we interviewed in the baseline. And then I led the team. I wasn't there when they did the baseline, but I got the baseline, and I got this responsibility to do a kind of impact analysis of what had happened, within the 3 years of the implementation of that project. And then we got to one of the communities. We discovered that there was crisis. We were lucky we didn't move in because we're talking about minimizing harm here. We were lucky we didn't move in. When we approached, we were using white hillocks, and then we asked question just before we entered the village, and people told us to stop there. That village was attacked few days before our arrival, and the people that came to attack them came on white hillocks. So if we had entered there, they were already laying ambush and waiting for the return of that same group that attacked them. If we had mistakenly stepped into that village without getting the necessary information, they would have attacked us unknowingly, thinking that we were the enemies. So that was where we stopped. But I needed to complete my study. What did I do? I found some local people there, and I asked them, look at the families I'm studying. Can you please help me? So they agreed. They went on bike, and we paid the motorcycle guys to get into the villages, and they were able to bring the household head for us. We paid for the transportation. They brought the household head for us in a safe place where we were able to interview them. And that was how I was able to record about 95%, coverage of the baseline households that were interviewed. And there were 1,000 households. So you try to minimize your harm as much as possible, not just to the respondent, even to the research person. Now, the other one is the confidentiality and privacy of the information. Confidentiality and privacy of the participant must be maintained throughout the study. If somebody is not willing to answer your certain question, for instance, you are doing an interview in a community, we do it sometimes, and you are interviewing a particular household. Some villagers are around and they want to come close to hear the interaction. No, I want them to leave, so that this person will have the confidence to give me the details I'm asking. When you start asking about household consumables, amount of money they consume per household and all of that, and then you are asking about social issues, relationship in the family. It's not something the villagers need to know. So you ask them, please, can you excuse me, shift away to a safe distance where you are sure they will not get to know what this person is responding. We've done some research where we needed to interview the man, the household head, and the spouse, the female spouse. All right, so we have to interview the women where the husbands will not be able to hear what the wife is responding, otherwise that will introduce bias. So that confidentiality should be ensured, privacy should be provided. Avoid identifying the participant. Of course, we have said it earlier. In your report, you try to de-identify that report as much as possible, and then consent must be obtained. That's part of the informed consent. We had a program somewhere, we were preparing for a study, and then we got a research contract, and I love what the people did. We came for a takeoff meeting, and then we took a group picture. For them to use our group picture on their website, they needed us to fill informed consent, and they explained to us, and we had to sign that they can use our picture. So these are things you shouldn't look down on. Keep an eye on it. Another important thing in ethical consideration is ensuring the integrity of your data and the reporting system. All right, data integrity is very, very important in primary data. As much as possible, the researcher, of course, if you gather the information, you evaluate it, and you present it as truthful as possible, openly, without trying to falsify the information or fabricate the thing, or try to manipulate the data because you want to achieve a particular objective. Be honest and thorough throughout your reports. Reflect the situation as it is. Information they gave you, interpret it as you have found it. In doing that, you may not be able to achieve your expected hypothesis, but it may help you to develop another area of interest. You may discover something you never thought of in the course of that research. So be as open as possible. Maintain the integrity of your data. This is where we're going to stop our discussion today. Thank you very much for joining in this class. Best wishes. Cheers.